Hello and welcome to episode 20 of Deck Doctor. I've done 20 episodes on different decks for Faeria. It has been an absolute blast and I'm very excited to bring this deck to you today. Now, this is Minocaro's green-yellow haste combo deck that was used in the monthly cup, and I've been playing this a lot recently and I'm having a blast with it. Now, this is a combo deck, so it can be perceived as pretty broken sometimes. Combo decks can be non-interactive, and I can see how that can be an issue in any card game, but don't know if you know this about me, I'm a big lover of combo decks. I like piecing together the deck's puzzle, because most of the time you play this deck like it's a puzzle. You're trying to find individual pieces to slot together perfectly to kill your opponent. Now, this deck can win in one turn given the right selection of cards, and after playing this extensively on ladder, I feel the issue that the community might have with this deck is lack of knowledge, lack of ways to defeat it, or not just knowing how to counter it. And there are very straightforward ways to help you win against this deck, and I will cover them in a land placement segment of this video. Now, green-yellow haste combo is a deck where you just build lands towards your opponent, you draw cards, you set up an Oaklin combo, not necessarily through feed, but through Oaklin dying in combat. It powers up your haste creatures. Your haste creatures hit the orb, you feed them, you play another haste creature, you hit them again until you can finish them off. So it's a combination of haste creatures and power-ups to be able to kill your opponent in 1 to 2 turns. So it can be very strong, especially if your opponent doesn't know what's going on. So let's talk about the cards, because in this list the cards have different roles to what they would usually have in more linear and standard Faeria decks. So it's very important to go over how to use these cards and where to use them, because this deck is quite skill intensive. So let's take a look at them and see what they do. Before we go into each creature individually, I'd like to point out that this deck doesn't use yellow creatures in the conventional style. All these creatures feature heavily in Yellow Rush, but you don't often use them in that way. You're more likely going to use them with Oaklin, an Oaklin power up, or you're going to power them up from hand and then maybe feed them to play more haste creatures to try and defeat your opponent in one turn. Now, Kalim's Follower is great because it's really cheap. You get an Oaklin buff on it, becomes a 5/6, not including any additional power-ups you pump into it. It can clear a creature to make way for a bigger haste creature, or you can push damage, maybe feed it if you want to try and finish your opponent off in one turn. Now, Origin Monk can be used without a power-up because it gives you card draw, so there will be situations where you can use this to just accelerate your hand, maybe activate a prayer. The same goes for the follower, but most of the time you're going to want to use this with an Oaklin power-up and use it in a one-turn kill capacity. A Wind Soldier, again, very similar to the other guys. You want to use this with an Oaklin buff or just power it up. You more than likely want to feed this card because it dies at the end of the turn. The other two you can keep on the board, especially if you're playing against someone like Mono Green that only has Voice of Truth to deal with its empowered state, whereas Wind Soldier's going to die, so Feed the Forest is going to give you a Faeria acceleration, and is one of the key cards to providing a one-turn kill. Now, another thing these haste creatures will do for you is stepping onto enemy land to set up aggressive deserts. Now, if your opponent understands how to counter this deck, and one of the main ways you stop green-yellow haste from getting off its combo is land blocking. So sometimes you will use a haste creature to just step onto your opponent's land to make an aggressive desert. So yeah, these guys are not used in a conventional way, but hopefully Deck Pilot will help you see how you use these creatures. These are your power-up cards to help initiate a one-turn kill. Now, Rudin's Guidance is a cheap power-up, but more importantly, you can gain life with it. And I've used this card to gain life quite a lot. So if your opponent is counter-rushing you, you can use the gain 5 life as a sustain until you find that one-turn combo, or just make the pain of Doomsday a little easier. So a lot of utility in Guidance. Elderwood Embrace does what it says on the tin, really. It just gives you a power-up. It gives you life as well, extra life, +2 life, which is relevant when you're using Feed the Forest, because you're going to gain additional Faeria when you use that combo. Now, Oaklin is absolutely key to this deck working. Now, most cases, you want your Oaklin to die in combat. You don't want to use your Feed the Forest on it, because Feed the Forest is essential to using it on your haste creatures, such as Wind Soldier, to recycle them, and sometimes make additional space for other haste creatures to deal damage. So you'll be using this card as a blocker to stop aggression from your opponent, and most of the times you want this to die in combat. Now, there are cases where you can use Feed the Forest with Oaklin, but you're going to have to analyze that yourself. Like I said, this deck is quite skill intensive, so you're going to be able to have to look at the board state and say, can I feed this Oaklin? Do I need to save this Feed the Forest for your haste creatures? So there's a lot going on in this list, and it's going to take a lot of practice before you are confident in some of the decisions you make. These are your main card draw mechanics outside of Feed the Forest. Khalim's Prayer is going to combo with all your haste creatures, give you additional Faeria, and allows you to cycle and dig deeper into your deck. Earthcraft is one of the cards that tips this deck over the edge. I would say this deck is at the top of tier 2. It's kind of pushing into tier 1 based on how well you pilot it. But Earthcraft is one of the cards that allows you to get around land blocking. Now, one of the key things you'll do is you'll start building forests, and eventually your opponent might figure out what's going on and try and land block you. But if you have an Earthcraft, you can use double neutrals to push past the land block and set up an aggressive desert. So Earthcraft really makes this deck powerful. There is a one-of Wisdom included by Minocaro, and I think it's great because it's just a way to cycle and dig deeper into your deck. You could replace this with, say, some hard removal, but I don't think it's necessary. I like the one-of Wisdom, I like the additional cycle it gives, and it's neutral as well, so you don't need to build any special lands to use it. You can pretty much use it at any point during the match. Our last selection of cards is a combination of removal and economy. Now, Feed the Forest is again an essential card in this combo. Feed the Forest not only allows you to destroy your Oaklins, gain additional fear and draw a card to empower the haste creatures in your hand, but its more important use is using it on your haste creatures once you're done to gain the massive Faeria advantage from the increased stats from the Oaklin buffs, or the power-ups from your Ruining's Presence or your Elderwood Embrace, and create additional space for other haste creatures to attack. So if you're being blocked by, say, 2 creatures around your opponent's orb and you only have 1 space to attack, Feed the Forest is key into opening up room and pushing more damage because you don't have a lot of removal in this list. Now, Choking Sands is a one-off. It's great at dealing with small taunts, one of the deck's weaknesses, like Wood Elemental and Living Willow. But you can also Choking Sands your own Oaklins without having to use the Feed the Forest, which is a very interesting line that Cappuccino pointed out to me during my stream. And I think that's a fantastic little trick you can use without having to use the Feed the Forest and Oaklin, and then you can save them for your haste creatures when you're setting up your lethal. Now, there is a one-of Doomsday, and I feel that one-of is perfect because you cycle through this deck so fast. And Doomsday is going to take a bit of practice. It takes a bit of timing. When your opponent is overwhelming you, it's a great opportunity to use Doomsday, clear the board, and wait for next turn to try and set up some damage combos. But yeah, like I said, it takes a bit of practice and timing and understanding when you need to Doomsday and when you need to hold Doomsday. And hopefully the episode of Deck Pilot will give you more insight on how this card is used. This is one of the easiest mulligans in all of Faeria. These 3 cards are the only cards you want to see in your opening hand. If you don't have any of these cards, you just mulligan the full thing. Earthcraft is amazing because it allows you to dodge land blocking. Oaklin gives you a creature to set up early, but you want to time your Oaklin when you have a haste creature in hand. You don't want to waste that power up. And Feed the Forest is essential for finding lethal. So these are the 3 cards you want to see in your mulligan. If you don't have any of these, throw the entire hand away. If you have one of, throw the the correct cards away to try and find them. I would say on top of the list, I would say Earthcraft and Oaklin. These are the 2 essential. And Feed the Forest, if you have one of your starting hand, just keep hold of it, because you are definitely going to need it when setting up your lethal. So how much does this list cost? It's got 9 commons, 13 rares, 8 epics, and 0 legendaries at a total cost of 945 Memoria. Now usually I would put up a changes for this list to make it cheaper, but I actually feel like Mino has made the perfect list here. It just flows so well, and I can't really see any replacements. You could drop the Choking Sands, but it has a lot of utility and it helps you get rid of taunts. But the other epics, I feel, are essential. You could feel like, oh, I could drop the Runin's Presence for a Tiki Caretaker. It does the same thing, where in fact it doesn't, because if the Oaklin power-up hits your Tiki Caretaker, you basically just hurt your chances of winning. You only ever want your Oaklins to hit your haste creatures, so you can't really put in power-ups that are based on gift abilities from creatures like Tiki Caretaker. So unfortunately, guys, I feel like you can't make any adjustments. Maybe a Choking Sands, you can squeeze in another Wisdom if you don't have the Choking Sands, but ultimately I feel like Minocaro has made the perfect list. Let's take a look at the strengths and weaknesses. So 1 turn kill potential. This deck can kill your opponent in 1 turn easily if you seed the right combinations and get the right cards while you're cycling through with your prayers and your Feed the Forests and your Wisdoms. I've done this so many times now, it's quite scary how consistent this deck can be. So yeah, you can just kill your opponent in 1 turn using a combination of haste creatures and Feed the Forest. It requires specific counterplay. Now, one of the weaknesses of this list is land blocking, which I'll cover in a bit, and taunts. Now, taunts can really hurt this deck because you don't want to waste damage or resources on clearing taunts, which is why there's one of Choking Sands to help you push past that 1 taunt that's blocking your way. So taunts can be a big problem. Mono green is probably this deck's worst matchup, but you don't really see much of it anymore. And the main archetype for green right now is probably Crackthorn, which runs Wood Elemental as its taunt, which Choking Sands can target. Now, this can win any matchup because of its explosive win condition. And that's right, you can pretty much win any matchup as long as you get the right combination of cards and you piece the puzzle together perfectly. And that's one of the primary strengths of combo decks, you know. And it has been, I guess, a problem with the archetype through all card games. Combo decks are usually non-interactive, and you kind of feel like you're playing solitaire sometimes, and they have these explosive win conditions that can be really hard to counter. Now, as for its weaknesses, it is skill intensive, and what I mean by that is you need to really have a strong grasp of what combination of cards you need to play in the right situations. You have to make big decisions on what resources to use, especially if your opponent is making strong counterplay like land blocking. Can you use a follower to push an aggressive land? Can you play an Oaklin to block taking damage without powering up something like a 50-50? Say you have an Oaklin in hand and a Kaleem's follower, and you have to play an Oaklin to block because you're taking too much damage. There's a 50-50 that the Oaklin will power up the other Oaklin, which you definitely don't want. So you have to make these assessments during your matches and make pretty intensive decisions, I feel, based on how the matchup is playing out. Now, land blocking really hurts this deck, but it doesn't stop it. I had a situation where I was playing on ladder on my stream, and we had a player who was playing mono red control, and he was playing perfectly. He had the right land blocking. He understood how I was trying to achieve my win condition, so he made blocks with creatures in vital positions. But no matter what he did, I just drew the nuts and killed him. I went into, like, I believe he was on like 8 life. I went into a 5/5 Wind Soldier. I hit the orb. I Kaleem sprayed into another Wind Soldier, which I had set up a position earlier on in the match and was able to finish him regardless of how well that player played. So land blocking does hurt, but it doesn't stop the deck all the time. Now, last but not least, we have time-sensitive turns because you play and draw a lot of cards. So you're against the clock when it comes to the later part of the match, because sometimes you're trying to figure out how to not die, how to kill your opponent in 1 to 2 turns. You have a lot to think about. How many cards are you going to draw? Are you going to overdraw? How can you kill your opponent in X amount of turns because they're now applying pressure to you? What combination of cards do you need to play in order to set up lethal, and what cards you need to draw, and how you manage your Faeria in order to set up a win condition. So like I said, a lot of thinking goes into each turn, and that clock does tick down, and you need to make sure you can make these decisions in time. And I think the time sensitivity and the skill intensive sides of the deck kind of entwine quite a lot, because you need to be able to identify these lines quickly in order to make the most of your time. For your land placement, you want to start off with forests from the center of your orb and build them up towards your opponent. Now, if you are completely uncontested doing this, you may be able to set up these aggressive deserts next to your opponent's orb so you can do the 1-turn kill combo and make sure your followers and monks are in range of moving towards your opponent's orb and hitting them. Now, this is the dream scenario. This is if your opponent doesn't understand how to defend against you and doesn't land block you. Earthcraft is very helpful when pushing around land blocks. It allows you to build like double neutrals and Earthcraft into a desert or a forest. But you're going to need 3 forests and 2 deserts in order to play every card in your deck, and you develop these as you progress towards your opponent. So that's pretty simple, right? But things get complicated when your opponent starts to block you, and I felt like it was crucial for me to inform you, the viewer, on how to defend against this deck as well as play it. Now, if you take a look at this example here, which I created for my Defending Against Rush guide, which is on the hub. I featured it on the main page, so if you want to learn how to defend against Rush, take a read of that, and it gives you a few examples. But as you can see here, we have the yellow tile. So imagine that Kaleem above is the green-yellow Rush player, and I'm the defender. So you have the yellow tiles represent the free forest your opponent is probably going to build. Now these yellow tiles you cannot stop. They are coming towards you. There are certain situations where you can, if you have like elementals, you can go like land into explore into elemental, and then you push 1 tile further. But in most cases, you're going to have to let these lands come towards you. Now the green lands are where you are safe from follower and monk. Now, Wind Soldier can still get in, but that does limit the options of haste creatures that can attack your orb. So these green lands are kind of your safer lands, but keep in mind that Wind Soldier can still push through. Now, the red lands represent all the danger areas that your opponent can attack your orb once they play a haste creature. So you want to stop your opponent from being able to build those red lands. They are your priority, and then after that you can maybe work towards the green lands. Now, back in the early access period, one of the most common ways to defend against Rush was setting up what we'd like to call the diamond. Now the diamond are 4 lands positioned, so your opponent has to build lands around the diamond into those green spots which I showed you in the last image. Now the diamond doesn't really work against conventional Rush decks anymore, mainly because of elementals, mainly because haste creatures just move on to them and develop aggressive land anyway. But against green-yellow Rush, I feel that the diamond is a viable defensive option to start land blocking your opponent. So give that a try if you feel that your opponent is playing green-yellow Rush, and you will be able to identify that very quickly. 2 things. 1, they'll build a forest directly in front of their first forest in front of their orb. Or 2, they do that as well as using Earthcraft to accelerate quicker. So keep that in mind when you're playing against your opponent and you see them developing these types of land, and then maybe prepare a diamond to be able to counter them, and land blocking is the best counterplay to this deck. Taunts are very good as well, but not every deck runs taunts, so you have to keep that in mind, and I don't feel like it's worth teching in a bunch of taunts because you'll make your other matchups even worse. So your best tool to defend against this style of deck is using the diamond strategy and land blocking your opponent so they only have access to the green tiles and not the red tiles. That wraps up this episode of Deck Doctor. There was a lot to cover today. It's a complicated deck, but once you get in the hang of it, once you've practiced it, you'll see these lines, you'll see your opportunities for lethal, but it will take some playing. And of course, you'll probably see this deck a little bit on ladder after this Deck Doctor, so I hope the land explanation to defend against it is going to be really helpful. Land blocking is essential if you want to stop green-yellow haste combo in its tracks. Another card that can help you if you're playing blue is Beirut. Beirut absolutely murders green-yellow haste because they don't have any hard removal outside of Doomsday, so they're 100% relying on Doomsday before Beirut triggers, and that can be very difficult to accomplish because there's only one of in the deck, and Beirut destroying deserts and forests is absolutely beautiful if you want to stop this deck in its tracks. Be sure to check out this episode of Deck Pilot. I think it's essential for you guys to understand how this deck plays. I feel like I can teach you better by going through my play-by-play rather than just explaining each card, because it's a bit like the blue-yellow pew-pew video I did like 11 episodes ago. It's very different to a conventional Faeria deck, and deck pilots are very good at explaining these styles of deck because you get to see the play-by-play and how all the pieces of the puzzle come together. Thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this deck. I know some of you are going to hate it, but I've been enjoying it a lot. I love combo decks, but I do see the problem with them. They can be very oppressive. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already to keep up to date of the latest content coming out from the Faeria team. If you haven't already, check out faeria.com/the-hub for all the latest articles, guides, and decks from myself and the community. So until next time, guys, take care and have a great day.